Alright, welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, we will be continuing our series on old Hollywood actors and actresses with probably the most well-known, I would say,
He's very well known, yeah.
Charlie Chaplin.
Yep. He was huge in the silent film era, especially. But yeah, he's definitely well known. If nothing else, everybody's at least seen images or something of him at the very least.
So, for those who were able to either meet him or even just watch his films, likely saw how effortlessly it seemed for him to execute his unique brand of comedy.
Right.
It was almost like he was born for it, which he may have been, since all the talent and gumption of the entertainer were inherent family traits. So, born on April 16th of 1889, Charlie's parents were both actors and singers who had certainly influenced his path in life. However, it didn't make things easy for him. By the time he was about 2 years old, his parents had separated, leaving his mother, Hannah, to raise her children on her own for the most part.
It's kind of funny there's been several of them that's happened where the parents have broken up. That was, not something that was quite as common back in those days either. So it's kind of funny in a way. Not funny, but like, haha, but just funny and, strange.
It's irony.
Right.
It is weird. It's almost like being famous kind of ruins your perception of reality.
Evidently, yeah. Even back then.
But, nah.
Yeah.
So, this was during the tail end of the Victorian era, so life was very far from easy for just anybody, really.
Really, right.
So he was actually fairly poor, and he had really no choice but to spend his days at either workhouses or pauper schools. In 1898, Charlie's life was turned upside down when his mother's health took a chilling turn. As a result of malnutrition and syphilis, Hannah developed psychosis and wound up in a mental institution. Both Charlie and his younger brother his brother Sidney had no choice but to live with their volatile father, who was known to be a very heavy drinker. As a lot of people were.
Yeah, that was a big thing too, and usually they're not very nice a lot of times.
No, usually they seem to be mean drunks.
Yeah, very much so.
So, Charlie did eventually escape what would be called a horror show of his father's home. When his mother recovered, his father died 2 years later. What makes it even worse, he had little time left with his mother, as she was ultimately doomed to spend the rest of her days in an institution, as she had eventually relapsed permanently in 1905.
I feel bad for her for that, because those were not fun places to be back in those days, especially. No. They were horrible most of the time.
So, in lieu of such misfortune, 14-year-old Charlie Chaplin had learned to be quite the independent man. Behind the scenes of his tragic childhood, he had already found a home on the stage. Thanks to his mother's talent and encouragement, Charlie began performing when he was just 5 years old. He went on tour with a clog dancing troupe, but deep down he wanted to do more than just dance. By the time his mother's health hit the point of no return, Charlie had already fostered a full-fledged ambition to succeed as an actor. Setting his sights on London's West End, he ended up with a theatrical agency. It was a move that, as it turned out, would change his life forever, as you can imagine. The manager of the theatrical agency recognized that young Charlie Chaplin had star potential and gave him a role in Jim, a romance of cocaine, and overall, the play was a total flop.
Yeah.
But there was one actor who stood above the rest. Critics had adored Charlie's comedic performance. This slew of good reviews caused a mighty ripple effect for his career. Charlie entertained success basically right out of the gates, working on several productions throughout his teen years. By the time he was 18, he was no longer an amateur performer. He had also had a very important connection in his corner, his brother Sidney, who was also an actor. Luckily, a major turning point came when Sidney secured him one of the biggest opportunities of his life. Thanks to Sidney's reputation, Charlie was well recommended to join Fred Carno's comedy company. Carno, however, was quite hesitant to hire him at first, thinking that the young actor looked much too shy to do good in the theater. It only took one jaw-dropping performance at the London Coliseum to silence these doubts. So, Charlie Chaplin signed a contract with the company. He was finally off to the races. With Fred Carno's company, Charlie became a shining jewel in their roster. He was lucky enough to actually travel to America, where he performed in 2 tours in the early 1910s. In the second of these, he made an impression on another industry representative, this time with Keystone Studios, looking to replace one of their actors. The film studio met with Charlie and signed him to a contract in 1913. Unfortunately, his debut was not what he had hoped for. Signing up for a contract for $150 a week, Charlie would not see his first bout of work until several months later, when he began production on the aptly named 1914 film Making a Living. Often describing the studio's films as crude, Charlie's attitude did not change, and he had finished this debut project of his with a bad taste in his mouth, despite the praise he had received for it. Fortunately, he had soon found his identity. Moving on from his first on-screen appearance, Charlie began working on the film Mabel's Strange Predicament, in which he had more control over his character. Intricately selecting each piece of his costume, Charlie had created the character of the Tramp, which would forever remain his most iconic personality.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, even I know that, and I really haven't even seen any of his stuff.
He's definitely most well known, and that's most of the images you see him is like dressed like that, in that little Tramp persona.
Yeah. So with this discovery, he was basically on track to take full control. Only a few months after his debut, the producer Mark Sennett trusted Charlie enough to give him the directorial reins of the upcoming film Caught in the Rain. Upon its release, Sennett was happy to see that he had made the right call. He rewarded Charlie's success with the freedom to serve as both actor and director for nearly every short film he had made with the studio. Still, he wasn't a man who stayed in one place for long. With Keystone Studios, Charlie reached a point where he was directing and acting in one film every week.
Good grief. Even short films, that's a lot, isn't it?
That is a lot.
Goodness gracious. That sounds like a porno star career, where they're like,
it
doing 1,800 movies, you know what I mean? Usually they're crazy numbers, you know what I'm saying, the big stars. But anyway, goodness gracious.
So, eventually, Charlie had asked for a raise from $150 to $1,000. Sennett refused, so Charlie decided to look elsewhere, which, fortunately for S&A Film Manufacturing Company, which offered to pay him $12.50 a week.
Goodness.
He naturally accepted.
I'd say so. That's a lot of money back in those days.
Oh, God, yes.
I mean, $12.50 a week's not terrible money nowadays.
Not really. So, one of his next projects led to an impactful encounter. After signing with S&A, Charlie got to work immediately and built up a team of comedic actors who he would regularly rely on. However, for his second film with the studio, called A Night Out, he still needed a leading lady. Fortunately for him, he found the right actress when he saw Edna Purviance by chance at a cafe. And he thought she was beautiful, so he decided to approach her, and she agreed. So, from the moment she had agreed to star in his films, the two of them began working rather closely, which soon led to more than just a friendly relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Rumors spread about their behind-the-scenes relationship, which ultimately proved to be true, as she starred in many of his films until both their professional and romantic relationship ended in 1917. By 1915, Charlie's Tramp character had appeared in 25 of his films, but he wasn't entirely pleased with the portrayal. Audience had come to expect the Tramp to be a more unkind character, and as a result, they started giving more negative feedback. In response, Charlie officially changed his character in The Tramp and played him as a more caring man.
Mm.
He clearly knew what he was doing, because as he continued to pump out films throughout 1915, he began to receive a lot more attention from audiences and critics alike, and his following had quickly increased. He was becoming more than just a movie star, as other businesses soon capitalized on his character and image, and he became the first among cinema stars to reach international fame. So, yeah.
So that's something to be proud of, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
I mean, definitely a trailblazer, so to speak.
So, along with all the positive publicity, as you can imagine, there was also negative, because you can't have one without the other.
Absolutely.
Although Charlie had become one of the most sought-after movie stars in the world, he was not immune to public scrutiny. American media may have been in love with him, but the arrival of World War I prompted the press in Britain to call him out for not fighting in the conflict. In his words, he was ready for either the US or Britain to call him to action, but neither ever did. So, He managed to climb higher. Between 1915 and 1917, Charlie had worked with another film company that had given him his own studio to work out of, a privilege he was eager to keep. So, when he then signed with the First National Exhibitors Circuit, he used the $1 million they gave him to build his own Charlie Chaplin studios just off Sunset Boulevard. Suddenly, his next big scandal had surfaced. By his late 20s, Charlie had become one of the highest paid individuals in the world, which he had virtually in the palm of his hands until his first real controversy arose. In 1918, a 16-year-old actress named Mildred Harris announced that she was pregnant with Charlie's child. Trying to prevent a massive scandal, Charlie married her away from public eye. Obviously, this was not a good decision. Not long after the marriage, the reality of the situation came to light with the revelation that Mildred wasn't actually pregnant. However, by the time Charlie had discovered this, Mildred was pregnant for real and gave birth to Norman Spencer Chaplin in 1919. Sadly, Norman passed away in infancy, and the miserable union of Charlie and Mildred ended the following year. Still, it wasn't long before he had found someone else. Around the time that Chaplin began production of his next film for First National, titled The Idle Class, he had hired an actress named May Collins to be his secretary. Once again, he failed to keep things professional, and the studio soon announced to the public in 1921 that the two had become engaged. This, however, as you can imagine, was not meant to last. So, the now 35-year-old Charlie became involved with an unfortunately familiar controversy when another 16-year-old actress named Lita Gray told him that she was pregnant with his child.
Good God.
However, this time it was true, and the announcement came around the time that Charlie was making his film The Gold Rush, which she was originally going to star in.
So I guess he likes them young and it's consistent, huh?
Yeah.
My goodness.
So, just as before, he tried to keep things under wraps. If the truth of Lita's pregnancy made its way to the authorities, Charlie could potentially face charges under California law. So he tried his best to avoid publicity. As such, he went to Mexico and arranged marriage between himself and Lita in 1924, before she gave birth to their first child, Charles Spencer Chaplin III. However, it didn't take long for things to reach a breaking point. Lita and Charles had another child, Sidney Earl Chaplin, in 1926, but their marriage would not last the rest of the year. Naturally, this was yet another horrible union, and even Charlie was in such a wretched state that he had barely spent time at home. This was for the best, as Lita soon realized that she deserved better and took their children and left. Their marriage would not have stayed a secret forever. Despite his efforts, Charlie couldn't avoid the truth completely, and Lita officially filed divorce in 1927. Shortly after, her application leaked to the public, alerting them to all the wicked things she was accusing Charlie of. Still, while there was a rising sentiment of banning his films, he had enough fans that it didn't take long for the whole incident to fall into obscurity. Meanwhile, the industry was experiencing a significant shift. Charlie had risen to the very top of the silent film era, but that time was quickly coming to an end, and change wasn't always welcome. With the technological advent of sound films, many eagerly embraced these as they were called talkies. However, others like Charlie voiced their opposition, claiming that the new form of filmmaking paled in comparison to the art of silent films. Unfortunately for him, his confidence in his craft took a hit. Despite being a staunch advocate of silent films, Charlie still grew nervous about their potential. This only worsened with the preview of his newest project called City Lights, which was met with a more negative reception than he was comfortable with. However, once he took it to the media, all the critics did was praise his skill and express defiance toward the new sound pictures. Behind the scenes, his personal life took another rather shocking turn. Having spent nearly a decade alone, Charlie was ready for another relationship, which came along once again as he was casting for his upcoming film called Modern Times, taking on the 21-year-old actress Paulette Goddard as his co-lead in the movie. The two of them began a romantic relationship almost immediately. Soon after, they traded the hustle and bustle of Hollywood for a life abroad. Charlie and Paulette worked on several projects going forward, but after their first film, they decided it would be best to get away for a bit. Becoming increasingly private people, they wanted to get as much distance from the spotlight as possible, and they traveled to the Far East in 1936. Unbeknownst to the press, the two of them married while on this journey. Having traveled the world, the state of it began to weigh on Charlie more and more. Through learning about global events from the comfort of Hollywood and then witnessing the state of the world throughout his travels, Charlie grew more invested in the geopolitical landscape. Specifically, the rise of militaristic nationalism in several countries deeply disquieted him. And even though it upset some audiences, this passion and fear found a place in his films. Unfortunately, he also bore a strong resemblance to someone less than pleasant. Eventually, many started to point out the similarities between Charlie and another man who was quickly gaining notoriety in the time in the new or in the world, the
Right.
new Führer of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
These similarities included details like a shared life story of rags to riches and being born 4 days apart, as well as their appearances, since the bad man and the tramp had the same mustache.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but yeah, the little tiny mustache thing, yeah.
So, at last, Charlie relented to the new age, inspired by the comparisons between himself and Hitler.
Right.
Charlie got the idea for his next film, The Great Dictator, but he would be making some serious changes. Finally, warming up to the concept of sound films, he realized that if he were to depict the kind of message he was looking for properly, people would actually need to hear it. Those who didn't like his more political projects would very much not be happy with the result of this one. Charlie had experimented with political themes in previous films, but The Great Dictator soon became his most iconic project to include such concepts. As a satirical view of the Führer, Charlie was sure to include his brand of comedy. However, he also ended the film on a more severe note, where his character delivers a 5-minute speech against fascism and conflicts. His relationship was also in an unstable place, as he had become familiar, or as had become familiar. Charlie and Paulette Goddard worked together again when she played a lead in The Great Dictator, but something was different. As they both were prone to throwing themselves wholeheartedly into their work, neither had much time for anything else. After a few years of slowly losing their spark, this divide pushed them to divorce in 1942. But their cooling chemistry wasn't the only thing that contributed to their breakup. Even before Charlie and Paulette's divorce, their loss of love was clear since he had started courting another woman a year earlier. This relationship with the 21-year-old Joan Barry was much more casual, but that did not seem to satisfy her at the end of the day, and she pursued him with an obsessive love. Finally, he had had enough. Joan Barry had dreams of being an actress, and Charlie intended to make her his next leading lady. However, he saw her as inexperienced, so he constantly worked to improve her acting skills to no avail. According to some accounts, Joan developed a drinking problem and stopped coming to acting class, which pushed Charlie to end things between them. However, Joan proved to be an even bigger problem for Charlie than he realized. Following their split, Joan became more obsessive, and her stalking even led to intervention by law enforcement several times.
Jesus.
In a familiar twist, she then asserted she was pregnant with Charlie's child, a notion he adamantly refuted. Still, after giving birth to her daughter, Carol Ann, Joan filed a paternity suit to prove that Charlie was the father. The trial did not go as planned, however, undoubtedly due to Charlie's strong political leanings and willingness to publicize them. The FBI grew suspicious of where his allegiances truly lied. But his fame was a sort of shield. To ruin his image, director J. Edgar Hoover used his scandal with Joan Barry to imply that Charlie was guilty of violating several laws. He even went as far as to name Charlie in 4 indictments. He accused him of having violated the Mann Act in his relationship with Barry, which prohibits transporting a person across state lines for the purposes of engaging in immoral behavior. Even if the charges did not stick, the damage was done, as the situation only became messier. Charlie's luck did not improve in 1944 when Joan's paternity suit went to trial and the prosecution seemed to be out for blood. Being accused of moral turpitude, Charlie submitted to a series of blood tests, which revealed he was not the father. Shockingly, though, the court ruled these tests inadmissible and ordered him to pay child support. I wonder why. Even with all these scandals, Charlie's search for love remained undeterred. As it turns out, Joan wasn't the only one Charlie had in mind as lead for his new movie, since he had also met a 17-year-old actress named Una O'Neill. All while the controversy surrounding him and Joan was happening, the now 54-year-old Charlie and Una had begun a relationship. However, before long, they eloped and announced their marriage. Meanwhile, he hadn't finished interweaving his films with deeper meanings. All the trials and scandals had taken their toll on Charlie's mental state, and he didn't make another film until 1946, when he commenced production on a film called Monsieur Verdoux, releasing the following year. The film again provided commentary on the society around him, specifically the world's complacency towards conflict and capitalism. Unfortunately for him, this only fanned the flames. Charlie was already in hot water from the John Barry scandal, and his marriage to a woman 36 years his junior did not help. But his film's release sealed his fate. The film's anti-capitalist message only provoked more contention, giving the media fuel to accuse Charlie of being a communist, and the FBI reason to launch an official investigation. Soon enough, this all finally came to a head. Charlie denied being a communist, and the FBI never found anything to incriminate him on of such sympathies, but many still wanted him kicked out of the country. Luckily for them, Charlie had planned to premiere his next film in London and had left in September of 1952. So, taking their chance, the government then rescinded the actor's re-entry permit for the U.S. Needless to say, Charlie was fed up at this point. The FBI had nothing substantial that proved Charlie was a communist, but the loss of his re-entry permit meant he would have to reapply again and prove his loyalty. Although many have since claimed he would likely have succeeded in this, Charlie decided that enough was enough, and he renounced any connections he had to America. From then on, it was clear his career would not be the same. Finding a home for his family in Switzerland, Charlie spent the following decades trying to reach the same heights as his previous works. This only amounted to 2 films, the second of which, a film called A Countess from Hong Kong, was considered a failure in nearly every aspect. This deeply affected Charlie and likely contributed to the end of his career shortly after. Of course, this wouldn't be the last hardship he faced. Despite the poor reception of his last film, Charlie didn't want to stop filmmaking immediately and still had a plan for his next picture, The Freak. By this point, he had started to include his family in his projects, and he wanted his daughter, Victoria, to star in this one. However, he never got that far into production as several minor strokes had put a stop to all of his work. Finally, he found himself back in a familiar place. By 1972, America was finally ready to bury the hatchet with Charlie, leaving the paranoia and hurt of the past behind. Therefore, Charlie received an invitation from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to return to the U.S. Skeptical at first, Charlie took them on their offer and happily received an honorary award along with a 12-minute standing ovation. Over the next few years, another series of strokes only caused his condition to worsen at a quicker pace, as he was soon confined to a wheelchair. Even then, he continued to think about potential filmmaking projects, but it wasn't meant to be. On Christmas morning in 1977, he suffered another stroke and passed in his sleep. However, even in death, there was more drama to be had. The next year, something rather alarming had transpired at his gravesite. 2 robbers unearthed his coffin and made away with the body. What they did with Charlie's remains was downright despicable. They attempted to hold it for ransom in order to get their hands on some of his widow's money. Fortunately, the story had a somewhat happy ending. Charlie Chaplin's remains were not doomed to be lost forever, and Una Chaplin didn't have to pay up to see him returned. Thanks to an extensive operation, authorities were able to recover the coffin from a field in the village of Novel. When the body was laid to rest for a second time, it was placed in a secure concrete vault. Despite everything, his impact remains to this day. To say Charlie left a complicated legacy would be a rather gross understatement. Although he had spent his life balancing work with whatever horrible scandal he was involved in, his achievements have since overshadowed the darker sides of his story. Rather than focusing on his many controversies, most hold him as cinema's possibly greatest artist, including Time, which named him one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends the story of Charlie Chaplin.
He definitely had an interesting life. I mean, and
absolutely
lived a good long life too. I mean,
which is very surprising.
Yeah, it is actually, especially considering the time he was born and just medical science during the majority of his lifetime wasn't significant. So yeah, now he had a crazy life, absolutely. But that is kind of sad and nuts that someone would go so far as to steal his body and then ask his widow for money to get it.
It's insane.
That's so sick.
It is.
It is sickening. Jesus Christ. It just goes to show what kind of people there are in this world. I mean, good God. That would be, I've never even dreamed of doing something like that.
God, no.
That's awful. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed that segment. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to
stay disturbed.